Big Blue Book Club presents Snack Club with Courtney Luecking and Anna Cason, featuring raising a happy, healthy eater and how to raise a mindful eater. Now, here are our hosts.
Feeding children is an adventure, and at some point or another, you might have had questions like, am I doing this right? Or is this normal?
Headlines, things we see online, things we hear from family and friends, and even unpacking what we see in the store can have us questioning what to feed our children. We want children to have what they need to lead happy, healthy lives, and it seems like as soon as we figure something out, it changes.
That's where we come in. My name is Dr. Courtney Luecking. I'm a registered dietitian and extension specialist for family and child nutrition. This means I have lots of training and expertise about child nutrition. I also have two littles of my own. This combination allows me to talk through practical, science-based strategies for creating a nourishing feeding environment for your family.
And my name is Anna Cason. I'm a registered dietitian and extension associate in food and nutrition. I don't have kids of my own, but my interests and passion lie in supporting healthy food-related behaviors, which begin in childhood.
In partnership with the University of Kentucky Cooperative Extension Services, we present Snack Club, where we share bite-sized bits of information for supporting nourished, active children in Kentucky.
So come for the snacks and stay for the support.
Courtney, how are you? I'm good. How are you?
Doing
Back again.
Yes, here we are.
Yeah, so today we're going to be talking about how, or setting the table for successful, for those who can't see my fingers, I'm doing air quotes, successful meal times through structure and boundaries. So an opportunity to, if you listen to our previous episode, dig in more about the adult's role in meal times.
Yeah.
So the what, the when, and the where.
Yeah.
So I want to ask you, what does a successful mealtime look for you?
Well, a lot of times it just depends on what's going on, like what our schedule is like. Maybe it's just sitting down to have dinner together, or maybe it's just having the time to cook a meal versus like running through somewhere grabbing something. But it's essentially just eating something.
Yeah.
I imagine our meal times look a little different than yours.
Yeah. Right. I love that you said that sometimes it's just eating, or at
Yeah.
the end of the day, it's eating, because I have a pretty low bar for what successful looks like.
Yeah.
But we recognize that those who are listening in or sharing this as a group, like everyone has a different look about what that looks like. And I think how, like when I was in your shoes and it was just me and my husband, and I would really cook these dinners, and I would spend a lot of time in the kitchen because I enjoyed that. And now he does most of the cooking, and I'm happy if we're fed like at the end of the day, and it's a bonus if it's like a balanced meal and my kids enjoy various parts and pieces of that. So successful looks different for everybody. But there are some small, again, we're all about small here because like life is hard enough.
Little bites.
Little bites, yes, Snack Club. So let's talk first about how we create structure, because when we create structure, it can take off some of that mental load that we often carry around with us if you're constantly feeling like you have to respond to what kids are whining about or asking about, and especially if it's food, you feel like you're feeding them constantly.
Yeah. So if you are following along in the books, you may have noticed that some of the chapters were geared more toward infancy or the littles. But they talked about starting with a feeding schedule at that young of an age. And a lot of times babies just innately have some sort of schedule set in. They'll let you know when they're hungry, and then they're ready to nap and all the other stuff. But kind of following along with that structure, that schedule from infancy through adolescence, childhood, all of that helps to kind of set structure so that when we do have meal and snack time, it's a reasonable, there's a reason for being at the table or getting together to eat.
Yes, I love that you said that. It reminded me in the Raising a Healthy, Happy Eater book, they talked about the importance of a feeding schedule, and they specifically called it eating times and growing times. So this point of where you said, like, we have a purpose to come to the table, for eating,
Mhm.
nourishing our bodies and our brains and maybe our souls if we're having a great social experience around the table. But then being away and like forgetting about food for a while so that we can play or learn or work depending on what our age is.
Yeah. So at that mealtime, you're enjoying the company, you're enjoying the food, and you're getting that satisfaction from a balanced meal of some sorts.
Okay, so it sounds like you're talking about the when piece.
Yeah.
So let's talk about how often do we as adults need to plan for children to eat?
So it's gonna depend on some factors, like if their activity levels are a little more, or if they're going through a growth spurt or something. But in general, most everyone needs about 3 meals a day, and then also plan for some snacks between those meals to act as a bridge from meal to meal. So maybe 3 meals a day, maybe 2 to 3 snacks, depending on, again, all these factors that play a role in how hungry they're going to be.
Okay, so caregivers, reminder that yes, children do in fact need to eat all day.
Yes,
It seems like you're feeding them all day.
So have snacks on hand,
Yes,
essentially.
yes, and we'll talk about kind of what to
Mhm.
piece together to make those sustain from one snack to one meal. But yeah, every like what, 2 to 3 hours when they're younger.
Yeah.
And then you can space it out a little bit more, but you talked about growth spurts. And so again, preschoolers, I think we always think about constantly feeding our toddlers because their stomachs are smaller and rapid body growth early on and then brain growth after that. But then older children are having that rapid growth too.
Yeah.
So and also just think about, okay, if they're away at school or a camp, something outside of the home, what time are those meals happening? Because yes, I always joke that my kids have 2 breakfasts, but it's because we have to leave so early and
and then they eat lunch so early.
Yeah. Okay, so that is the when piece. I think that naturally ties in with the where. So let's talk about that.
Yeah, so it, again, kind of like we touched on at the beginning, it's going to depend on schedules and where you may be at the moment. But for a successful mealtime, if we're hinting at having like a family meal, just trying to get together as much as you can, wherever it may be, whether it's on a blanket at the softball field or around a table for mealtime.
Yes. And so we talk about tables a lot, and that's great if you have access to that. At the end of the day, I think what we want to encourage people to do is find a place that is designated for where eating occurs. So not in front of the TV, not in a kid's room, because the more places that we eat, we start to associate eating with that. And so it can encourage this mindless eating, just eating when we're not hungry or doing something else. So finding that single solitary place in the house.
Designated. I always relate that back to, I feel like with work, they say don't bring your work. Like if you have a laptop or a portable workstation, don't bring it to your couch or in your bedroom, because same thing, your mind will associate different rooms with work, and who wants to work all the time? So
right. That's a great analogy. I think we can all appreciate that, especially with that pandemic that we had not too long ago, and how everything was upended and everything happened at home. So all over wherever we were living. So okay, and so we're talking about like physically where. Let's talk more about that physical space that we can set up. Because it's the chapter is focused on infancy. So again, you're like, why are we reading about high chairs? I have a 10-year-old. And part of that is just making sure we have the right sized seating or utensils. I know you and I both loved that bar stool activity. So maybe because we're sitting on right now. My foot is on the bottom, so I do feel a little bit more stable. How about you?
Same here, and I've got my leg propped up. So.
Yeah, but why don't we, in case people didn't have a chance to read it, tell them about like that bar stool analogy and what it's like.
So it's talking about mostly infancy. If your infant or toddler is struggling at mealtime and seem fidgety and just don't seem comfortable, check where they're, like if they have a stable bar or landing to rest their feet on while they're sitting in this chair that is elevated from the ground, because that can impact how they're sitting and what sort of movement they have with the rest of their extremities, and then that can impact feeding time. So like adults, they suggest sitting at a bar stool and letting your legs dangle, not resting them on the bar or scooting back far enough if you're in a taller chair so that your feet can't touch the floor. And then think about how less stability you have
Mhm.
versus if you can rest your legs somewhere. And then putting that into all the other things that infants are learning to do with mealtime, like grasp something and move it to their mouth. So it's like a workout for them.
It is. And even older, or like I am short. And so I
Yeah.
find that a lot of tables and chairs I sit in, my feet are uncomfortable and I
Yeah.
want to prop it up. And so it could be older children as well. If you find that kids are getting up during meals and wandering and things like
Yeah.
that, maybe like a great question, kind of be a detective, is to see, do we have the right supportive feeding
Mhm.
available for them?
Yeah.
And then also those utensils,
Yeah.
because we joke, we have 2 different size spoons and forks, for
Mhm.
example, and the big ones are just, to me, so heavy and huge. I'm like,
Yeah.
I want to use this smaller one. And so we joke that like there's my spoon and then there's dad's spoon, mom's
Yeah.
spoon and dad's spoon. But so that's another way that we can set up that environment. But even something as small as cups, like
Yeah.
is the cup too big and kids are more prone to
Yeah.
spill, or
Can I grasp it?
Mhm. Yeah, so that kind of contributes to the where piece, that
Mhm.
physical environment. But then we've hinted at it, but let's just talk about it, the social environment.
Yeah. So mealtime is food in our culture is meant to be enjoyed. It's a social factor that's part of our health. It does
Mhm.
contribute to our health in some way. So getting to enjoy that mealtime, kind of like you mentioned, in a set place, wherever that may be, and without distractions. So getting rid of TV, getting rid of phones,
Mhm.
tablets,
Mhm.
all the technology, and enjoying conversation with whoever you're having that meal with.
Yes, and it doesn't have to be everyone who lives in a
Yeah.
household.
No.
It can be a child and an adult, or a younger child and an older child.
Yeah.
So really kind of family meals is the term thrown around, but it
Mhm.
can really be any number of people, and it can be a picnic outside, for example. So it can still be that you're determining where
Mhm.
it's happening, and free of distractions. I'm glad that you mentioned that,
Yeah.
because I find that they can just easily creep in, or we're parents trying to get ready in the morning and it's easy to just throw a screen on or put a
Mhm.
tablet, and then kids seem to be occupied, but
Yeah.
leads to that distracted eating and just not being as in tune or aware of what is going on around with them.
Yeah.
Now, I know we need to talk about the what piece, but we're already talking about the social, and eating with people has lots of benefits.
Yeah.
So maybe we could just quick talk through what some of those benefits are.
Yeah. So for both the adults in the situation and the children or younger ones in the situation, there are benefits to, like I mentioned, their physical health because they're paying attention to hunger cues and everything that we talked about in one of our other episodes. And also the social connection and being able to use their brain for eating, but also for the communication and getting to think back to what happened in their day and share it, or think about or share something that they're thinking about for the future that they're excited about or something. So we've got mental health, physical health. What are some other aspects?
Yeah, so improve dietary quality. So when people gather, they tend to eat more nutritious foods. And even academic performance, like it kind of all ties in together, the social, emotional, physical, whole child benefits. So that's great. All right, we've talked about where and when. Like we've talked about what more at length in another episode, but just quickly thinking about some tips for what to serve during those times that we've designated. So what are some general guidance to help people throw together, or plan, we should say, might be a more planning rather than reacting for nutritious or balanced meals?
Yeah, which I think planning is like the underlying factor for all of these. You kind of have to plan in advance for where the meal's going to happen and when, and then also for the what. So we talked about My Plate in one of our other episodes, which essentially is just provide some visual guidance for a balanced plate or a balanced meal. So thinking about incorporating as many food groups as you can to look like My Plate for a meal. And then for snacks, it doesn't have to be a full balanced plate, but still trying to get like 2 to 3 different food groups for snacks, again, to bridge from meal to meal. So they're still getting nutritious foods and satisfaction from the foods that they are eating, but not necessarily feeling full from an entire meal of all the food groups, which is that bridging.
I think that's a helpful guidance, just like numbers and the visual aspect of it. And if children are younger, or the word snack brings certain images to mind, and it's probably not what we're talking about. Like when I'm thinking of snack, I'm thinking of like an apple with peanut butter or cheese and crackers. But I know our culture, a lot of times it's like chips or cookies or candies or things. And so we've been cautious about the language we use around, like those kinds of foods are more treats. So we can have them, they're considered a treat. Or you could call a snack a mini meal if that helps change your brain. Like we're wanting to have a more balanced approach to what we're offering to feed, you know, the eating time and then the growing time. Okay, so we've talked about structure, boundaries. Getting input from family can help with the what if it feels like such a burden to try to pull it all together. And then posting it can help put it out there about, okay, this is our schedule for the week. This is what we're planning with some flexibility, right? Like my husband always, I have a plan, and I'm like, but what's on with the flow? Tuesday doesn't have to be Taco Tuesday. We can do breakfast. I don't care. We just have enough ideas for the week that we're fed.
So planning ahead, and then you can get the groceries that you need to for those meals. And it helps for young ones, depending on their age, if they can read the schedule, and then they, again, kind of going back to the trust factor with the division of responsibility, they know that there is a meal planned at the designated place at a specific time. And then they have an idea of what to expect with it.
Oh, I'm so glad you brought that up, because children thrive with structure and routine. Yes. And that's exactly what we're talking about here, is giving them those opportunities to thrive where they can think about food, that trust, and then they can move on. So let's talk about, because when we make structure and boundaries to be successful, our buzz magic word for the episode, we do have to be consistent. So consistency is one key to success. And so if you try it once and it doesn't work, try again, because it's going to take that over time. But once we have those boundaries, sometimes that means we might have to say no.
Which can be maybe we'll feel a little hesitant about that, or getting nervous when thinking about having to say no.
Yes. And no doesn't always have to be no. It could be not right now. And so let's talk through some ways. I thought there were some great examples in the book. And so let's, I think some general guidance to saying no is acknowledging what the request is. So instead, I mean, just think about how we feel. If we just get flat out get shut down, it doesn't feel good. But to be heard that like, oh, you really want that cookie. And you already had a cookie earlier today. So I'm acknowledging, I'm putting up that boundary. I didn't quite say no, but I said you already had one. So reminding them of what our guidelines and structure are for the day. So explaining, acknowledging, empathizing, and then explaining kind of why not.
Kind of like the sandwich method for giving someone constructive criticism, kind of throw in some positive at the beginning and then explain it in the middle, and then maybe they can have the cookie later or tomorrow. That can be their treat.
Exactly. So I think if it was in the book with Raising a Happy, Healthy Eater, a closer look at saying no, their guidance was compassionately. We talked about that. So, oh, that does look really good, or we know that tastes good, or saying no mindfully. That's a way to, again, communicate what is the food culture in your family. Like, we don't buy those kinds of foods, or we incorporate those on the weekend, and these are just guidance. We'll talk about creating what guidance works for a family on a future episode. But being proactively, so knowing when you're like the checkout. Bless it. For a while there, they had some healthier options, but they are right there at child level.
Like, they do that for a reason.
And it works. I'm like, self-checkouts now. I'm afraid, like, my daughter's shaking the gum, and I'm like, don't, like, please put that back. It's going to somehow land in the bag, and we're going to, think we shoplifted or something. But yes, so it is problematic. So knowing that's an issue, is there anything we can do to thwart it? In advance, kind of set the expectations, being consistent. So communicate. We can't, I know you and I have talked about this before, like, we want people to read our minds sometimes, and
it doesn't happen.
It doesn't. So we need to be clear if this is going to change, like if it's going to look different for us to create that structure for our family, communicating that. So here's the plan, getting input as age appropriate, and then holding it to it. Yeah. And then joyfully. So we can have these treats or things as we want to include them, and just letting children know when they can expect that or something similar. So some really helpful guidance. And I think we have, or I guess one more point before I say that, but patiently.
Yes.
Because, yes, there will be some pushback, most definitely at first, or even from time to time. But with that consistency, children will know to expect it, and it can become less of an issue over time. And they can understand, nope, you mean it when we're saying no to that right now.
Yeah. And with all of this together, moving into setting more structures and boundaries that can be scary for the kid at first if it's something different. So again, just being open, having the conversation and saying, this is how we're doing things. We're trying something new. This is how it's going to be from now on. And then consistently sticking to whatever it is over time.
Yes. And let's not pretend it won't take more work on an adult's part of like planning and navigating the emotional pushback and things like that. But again, with input and developing our own sense of routine, it can become a little bit more routinized for ourselves. And it's like, okay, well, for me on Sundays, it works to map out the week and see what we need. So find what works for you in terms of that brain space and who puts their input in and who does what, delegating tasks, and just laying it all out there.
And kind of like we've touched on in other episodes, giving yourself grace too through this whole process.
Absolutely. So maybe to recap the things that we've talked about today. So how can we create a successful mealtime, set the table for a successful mealtime? And Anna, what would you say the keys of that are?
Planning in advance, and then really taking on the caregiver, the adult responsibilities for the what, the where, and the when. So having that structure set up for the location, for the environment that you're in, when it's going to happen, and then also what is being provided.
Yeah, absolutely. And then recognizing that sometimes we need to say no. So we hope that you all want to maybe give it a go. It's a work in progress, right? Because our schedules change and children grow and then they have different activities. And so these aren't to say these are hard and fast rules when we're talking about structure or boundaries, but they are guidelines that can continue to keep people kind of weaving through the journey of feeding and nourishing children.
Yes, the adventure.
Yes. So if people are interested in more resources, check our show notes. We'll have some links there. And then as always, we want to hear from you. So if you have questions or topics you're talking about that you'd like us to talk about, you can reach us at
Snack Club, SNACKCLUB at uky.edu.
Yes. Well, thanks for joining.
Yes.
And we hope you'll come back soon.
Yeah.
Thanks for joining us for another episode of Snack Club. Resources related to the topics discussed in this episode can be found on our website, linked in the show notes. Your local Cooperative Extension office is also a wealth of information and can provide links to local resources.
If you have other topics you would like to hear about, send us a note at snackclub@uky.edu. That's snackclub@uky.edu. And as a reminder, the digestible bits of information we share are like navigation signs for your feeding journey, but you may need to contact a healthcare provider for more personal advice.
And last but not least, special thanks to our team behind the scenes, Mindy McCulley for bringing this audio and video file to life with her technology skills, and to the people through her marketing magic, and to Kelly Thompson for her creative ability to turn one conversation into our Snack Club symbol.
We hope to see you again soon.